Sarah Martinez pulled her old Honda into the grocery store parking lot as the evening sun cast long shadows across the asphalt. Her 8-year-old son Tommy sat in the back seat, his face buried in a comic book about superheroes. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few scattered cars and a group of 3 men leaning against a black pickup truck near the store entrance. "Mom, can we get ice cream?" Tommy asked, looking up from his comic with hopeful eyes. Sarah smiled at her son through the rearview mirror. "We'll see, buddy. Let's get the groceries first." She had just moved to this small town in Arizona 3 months ago, seeking a quiet life away from the chaos of her previous world. The town of Cedar Ridge was supposed to be peaceful, a place where she could raise Tommy without constantly looking over her shoulder. Sarah had told everyone she was a former fitness instructor who had saved enough money to start fresh. It was a simple cover story that explained her athletic build and disciplined routine. As they walked toward the store entrance, Sarah noticed the 3 men near the truck watching them. Something about their posture and the way their eyes tracked her movements set off alarm bells in her mind. Years of training had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming danger. The first man was tall and heavily built with arms covered in tattoos. The second was shorter but stockier, with a shaved head and cold eyes. The third looked younger, maybe in his 20s, with a nervous energy that made him fidget constantly. All 3 had the look of men who were used to taking what they wanted. "Stay close to me, Tommy," Sarah said quietly, placing a protective hand on her son's shoulder. Inside the store, Sarah tried to focus on her shopping list, but she remained aware of her surroundings. The 3 men had followed them inside and were now pretending to browse the aisles while keeping an eye on her. She noticed they weren't actually putting anything in their basket. Sarah had faced dangerous situations before, but this was different. She had Tommy to protect, and her cover identity meant she couldn't react the way her training dictated. She was supposed to be just another single mom trying to make ends meet, not someone who had spent years in some of the most dangerous places on earth. The store clerk, a teenage girl with pink hair, seemed oblivious to any tension as she restocked shelves near the checkout counter. An elderly man browsed the pharmacy section, and a young mother with a baby examined baby formula. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that predators were circling. Sarah finished her shopping quickly, hoping to get out of the store before any confrontation could occur. But as she approached the checkout counter, she realized the 3 men had positioned themselves between her and the exit. The tall one with tattoos was browsing magazines near the door, while the other 2 had spread out to cover different escape routes. "Excuse me," the tattooed man said as Sarah tried to pass with her cart. His voice was rough, and she could smell alcohol on his breath despite the early hour. "You're new in town, aren't you?" "Yes," Sarah replied simply, keeping her voice steady while positioning herself slightly in front of Tommy. "Thought so. Haven't seen a pretty little thing like you around here before." His companions moved closer, forming a loose semicircle around her cart. "Name's Jake. These are my friends Butch and Rico." Sarah nodded politely but didn't offer her own name. She could feel Tommy pressing against her leg, sensing the tension even if he didn't understand it. "We were thinking," Jake continued, "maybe you'd like some company tonight. Show you around town, introduce you to the local nightlife." "That's very kind, but I have plans," Sarah said, trying to maneuver her cart around them. Butch, the stocky one with the shaved head, stepped sideways to block her path. "Ah, come on now. Don't be unfriendly. We're just trying to be neighborly." The teenage clerk was now watching nervously from behind the counter, but she was just a kid and clearly didn't know what to do. The elderly man had disappeared into another aisle, and the young mother had moved to the far end of the store. "I appreciate the offer, but we really need to get home," Sarah said firmly. Rico, the youngest of the 3, laughed unpleasantly. "Hear that, guys? She appreciates the offer. Real polite." He leaned closer, invading her personal space. "But maybe we weren't really asking." Sarah's muscles tensed automatically, but she forced herself to remain calm. These men clearly thought they had cornered an easy target, a single mother with no protection and no options. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Look, she said, keeping her voice level. I don't want any trouble. I'm just trying to shop for groceries with my son. Yeah, about that, Jake said, glancing down at Tommy, who was clutching his comic book and staring up at the men with wide, frightened eyes. Maybe the kid should wait in the car while we talk. Absolutely not, Sarah said, her tone sharpening. The three men exchanged glances, and Sarah saw something shift in their expressions. What had started as crude flirtation was turning into something more aggressive. You know what, lady? Butch said, moving even closer. I think you need to learn some manners. This is our town, and we're trying to be nice to you. Sarah quickly assessed her options. The store layout offered limited escape routes, and with Tommy beside her, a physical confrontation would put him at risk. She needed to de-escalate the situation, but these men seemed determined to push things further. Mom? Tommy's voice was small and scared. Can we go home now? The sound of her son's frightened voice triggered something protective and fierce in Sarah's chest, but she forced herself to remain outwardly calm. She had been in worse situations than this, but never with Tommy present, never when failing meant something happening to her child. We're going home right now, sweetheart, she told Tommy, then looked directly at Jake. Please move aside. Instead of moving, Jake reached out and grabbed her arm. I don't think you understand the situation here, honey. We're trying to be friendly, but our patience has limits. The moment his hand touched her arm, every instinct Sarah had developed over years of combat training screamed at her to react. She could have broken his wrist before he knew what was happening. She could have had all three men on the ground in under 30 seconds. But Tommy was right there, watching, and she was supposed to be just another civilian. Let go of me, she said quietly, but there was steel beneath the words. Jake's grip tightened instead. See, that's the wrong attitude. We're going to have to teach you some respect. Rico moved toward Tommy, and that's when Sarah knew the situation had moved beyond any possibility of peaceful resolution. These weren't just crude men making unwanted advances. They were predators who had decided to escalate to actual violence. Don't touch my son, Sarah warned, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. But Rico either didn't hear the warning in her tone or chose to ignore it. He reached toward Tommy, probably intending to grab the boy as leverage against his mother. Tommy scrambled backward, bumping into a display of cereal boxes, sending them clattering to the floor. The noise echoed through the store like a gunshot. Mom! Tommy cried out, real terror in his voice now. Sarah looked at her frightened son, then at the three men who thought they could terrorize a child to get what they wanted from his mother. Something cold and implacable settled in her chest. Last warning, she said, her voice now carrying an edge that made Jake's eyes narrow with suspicion. Walk away. Now. Butch laughed. Or what? You'll call the cops? Sheriff's department doesn't patrol this part of town much after 6. They had planned this. They had been watching her, learning her routine, waiting for the right moment. This wasn't a random encounter but a deliberate attack. Sarah realized that her peaceful new life in Cedar Ridge was about to come to an abrupt end. She had tried to be just another single mother, tried to blend in and live quietly. But these men had made that impossible. She looked at Tommy one more time, seeing the trust and fear in his eyes. He was counting on her to protect him, and she would. Even if it meant revealing exactly who and what she really was. The teenage clerk had pulled out her phone, probably calling for help, but Sarah knew that help wouldn't arrive in time. The elderly man had vanished completely, and the young mother was huddled in the corner with her baby, too scared to intervene. It was just Sarah, Tommy, and 3 men who had no idea they had just made the worst mistake of their lives. Jake tightened his grip on her arm and nodded to his companions. Grab the kid. Let's take this conversation somewhere more private. That's when Sarah Martinez, former Navy SEAL, stopped pretending to be helpless. The transformation was instantaneous. One moment Sarah Martinez was a frightened single mother backing away from 3 threatening men, and the next moment she was something entirely different. Her posture shifted, her eyes went cold, and suddenly, Jake found himself looking at a predator instead of prey. Sarah's hand moved so fast that Jake barely saw it. She grabbed his wrist with her free hand, twisted it in a direction wrists weren't meant to go, and applied pressure to a specific point that sent lightning bolts of agony up his arm. Jake's grip on her other arm released immediately as he howled in pain and dropped to one knee. "Tommy, get behind the counter," Sarah commanded without taking her eyes off the three men. Her voice carried an authority that made her son obey instantly, despite his confusion. Rico, who had been reaching for Tommy, found himself facing a woman who seemed to have grown several inches taller and infinitely more dangerous in the span of a heartbeat. He hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "What the hell?" Butch snarled, moving towards Sarah while Jake writhed on the floor clutching his damaged wrist. "You think you know some karate or something?" Sarah didn't answer. She released Jake and turned toward Butch, her stance balanced and ready. Years of training had taught her to assess threats quickly, and she could see that Butch was the most dangerous of the three. He moved like someone who had been in real fights before, not just a bully who picked on the helpless. Butch swung a heavy fist toward her head. Sarah ducked under it easily, the motion fluid and economical. As his punch passed over her, she drove her elbow upward into his solar plexus with surgical precision. The blow drove all the air from his lungs and sent him staggering backward, gasping. Rico finally overcame his shock and charged at her from the side. Sarah pivoted smoothly, caught his arm as he swung, and used his own momentum to send him crashing into a display of soup cans. The metallic clatter filled the store as dozens of cans scattered across the floor. The teenage clerk was screaming now, still holding her phone, trying to give their location to what Sarah assumed was a 911 operator. The young mother in the corner was using her body to shield her baby while staring at the scene in complete shock. Jake struggled to his feet, his face twisted with rage and pain. "You crazy witch! You broke my wrist!" "It's sprained," Sarah corrected calmly. "If I had wanted to break it, you would know the difference." The cold certainty in her voice seemed to chill the air around them. These three men who had strutted into the store full of confidence and cruel intentions were suddenly facing someone who spoke about inflicting damage with the casual expertise of a professional. Butch had recovered his breath and was eyeing Sarah with new respect and considerably more caution. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm someone who was trying to have a quiet evening with her son," Sarah replied. "Until you three decided to change that." Rico was picking himself up from the soupcan wreckage, a cut on his forehead bleeding freely. He looked around at his companions, clearly reassessing the situation. What was supposed to be easy intimidation had turned into a nightmare. "Look, lady," Rico said, wiping blood from his face. "Maybe we got off on the wrong foot here." "You threatened my child," Sarah said simply. "There is no coming back from that." The finality in her voice sent a chill through all three men. Jake was still cradling his injured wrist, Butch was breathing carefully and keeping his distance, and Rico had blood trickling down his face. None of them looked like they were in control anymore. "We weren't really going to hurt the kid," Jake said, though he didn't sound very convincing even to himself. Sarah's expression didn't change. "You reached for my son with the intention of using him as leverage against me. In some parts of the world, that would earn you a death sentence." "Some parts of the world?" Butch repeated, his eyes narrowing as he tried to process what he was seeing. "Just who are you?" Before Sarah could answer, she heard the sound of vehicles pulling up outside. Through the store windows, she could see the flashing lights of police cars. The teenage clerk's call had brought help, but Sarah knew it would complicate things considerably. "Tommy, stay exactly where you are," she called to her son, who was crouched behind the checkout counter, still clutching his comic book. Two sheriff's deputies entered the store with their hands on their weapons, taking in the scene of scattered soup cans, a bleeding man, and three others who looked like they had been in a fight. "Nobody move!" the first deputy commanded. He was older, with gray hair and the weathered look of someone who had been doing this job for decades. "Everyone stay exactly where you are." The second deputy was younger, probably new to the job, and his eyes were wide as he tried to process what he was seeing. The teenage clerk immediately started talking, her words tumbling over each other as she tried to explain what had happened. These 3 men were threatening that lady and her little boy, she said, pointing at Sarah. They were being really scary and wouldn't let her leave, and then they tried to grab her kid, and then she did some kind of martial arts thing and slowed down, the older deputy said, holding up a hand. Let's take this one step at a time. He looked around the store, noting the scattered merchandise and the obvious signs of a struggle. I'm Deputy Williams. This is Deputy Chin. Can someone tell me what happened here? Jake immediately spoke up, his voice whiny with pain and indignation. That woman assaulted us. We were just being friendly, and she went crazy and attacked us for no reason. No reason? Sarah's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it. You physically grabbed me when I tried to leave, and then your friend attempted to grab my 8-year-old son. Deputy Williams looked at the scene more carefully. He noted Jake's injured wrist, Rico's bleeding face, and the fact that Butch was standing well away from Sarah despite being physically larger than her. Ma'am, he said to Sarah, can you tell me your name? Sarah Martinez. This is my son Tommy. And you 3? Williams asked, turning to the men. Jake Morrison, Jake muttered. Rico Valdez, Rico said, still dabbing at his bleeding forehead. Butch Harrison, the 3rd man said reluctantly. Williams nodded slowly. He knew all 3 names. Jake Morrison had been arrested twice for public intoxication and once for disorderly conduct. Rico Valdez had a record for petty theft and harassment. Butch Harrison was on probation for assault. Ms. Martinez, Williams said carefully, these gentlemen are claiming you attacked them without provocation. Sarah looked at him steadily. These men followed me into the store, surrounded me and my son, blocked our exit, made unwelcome advances, ignored my requests to be left alone, physically grabbed me when I tried to leave, and then attempted to grab my child. I defended myself, and my son using only the force necessary to neutralize the threat. The precision and formality of her language made Williams raise an eyebrow. Most civilians didn't speak about neutralizing threats with such clinical detachment. Lady, that's not how it happened, Jake protested. We were just trying to be friendly, and she went berserk on us. The teenage clerk spoke up again. That's not true. I saw the whole thing. Those guys were being really creepy and scary, and they wouldn't leave her alone even when she asked them to. Williams looked at the young mother who was still huddled in the corner with her baby. Ma'am, did you see what happened? The woman nodded nervously. Those 3 men were definitely threatening her. They blocked her way and grabbed her arm. She kept asking them to leave her alone, but they wouldn't listen. When that one, she pointed at Rico, tried to grab her little boy, that's when she defended herself. Deputy Chin was examining the scattered soup cans and knocked over merchandise. Looks like quite a fight happened here. It wasn't a fight, Sarah said quietly. It was 3 men threatening a woman and child, and that woman protecting herself. Williams studied Sarah more carefully. She was clearly in excellent physical condition, but that wasn't unusual in a state like Arizona where many people were into fitness and outdoor activities. What struck him was her complete calm in the aftermath of what must have been a traumatic experience. Most people would be shaking or crying after being attacked. Sarah looked like she was ready to fill out paperwork. Miss Martinez, where did you learn to defend yourself like that? Sarah hesitated for just a moment. I've had some training. What kind of training? Another pause. Military training. Williams nodded. That explains some things, though not everything. He had served in the army himself, and while military training was certainly valuable, what he was seeing suggested something beyond basic self-defense instruction. What branch? Navy. What was your specialty? Sarah looked at Tommy, who was listening to every word, then back at Williams. I'd prefer not to get into specifics with my son present. Williams understood. There were some military specialties that parents didn't discuss in front of their children, especially the kinds that involve working in very dangerous places doing very dangerous things. Jake was growing impatient with the questions. Are you going to arrest her or not? She assaulted 3 people. Williams looked at Jake with barely concealed disgust. Mr. Morrison, based on what I'm hearing from witnesses, it sounds like you and your friends were the ones doing the assaulting. Miss Martinez was defending herself and her child. That's ridiculous. Butch finally spoke up. Look at us. Look at her. Who do you think did the assaulting here? Williams did look. He saw 3 men who were bigger and stronger than Sarah, all of whom had criminal records, all of whom appeared to have been drinking. And he saw a single mother with a young child who had somehow managed to defend herself against all 3 of them without sustaining so much as a scratch. Either Sarah Martinez was incredibly lucky, or she was much more dangerous than she appeared. Deputy Williams had seen enough domestic disturbances and bar fights to recognize the difference between someone who got lucky and someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Sarah Martinez fell into the second category, and that made him very curious about her background. Mr. Morrison, Mr. Valdez, Mr. Harrison, Williams said formally, you're all under arrest for assault, attempted kidnapping, and disturbing the peace. What? Jake shouted, his voice cracking with indignation. You're arresting us? She's the one who attacked us. According to multiple witnesses. Williams replied calmly. You 3 men surrounded Ms. Martinez and her son, refused to let them leave, physically grabbed her, and attempted to grab her child. That's assault, false imprisonment, and attempted kidnapping. The fact that Ms. Martinez was able to defend herself doesn't change what you did. Deputy Chin moved forward with handcuffs, but Williams held up a hand. Before we do that, I need to ask Ms. Martinez a few more questions. He turned to Sarah, who was still standing in the same calm, alert posture she had maintained throughout the confrontation. Ma'am, I need you to be completely honest with me about your military background. What exactly was your specialty in the Navy? Sarah glanced at Tommy, who was still crouched behind the counter, watching everything with wide eyes. Tommy, honey, can you go sit by the magazines for a few minutes? Stay where I can see you, but give the adults some space to talk. Tommy nodded and scurried over to a rack of children's magazines near the front of the store, still within sight but out of immediate earshot. Deputy Williams, Sarah said quietly, my military service involves specialized operations. I'd prefer not to discuss details in a public setting. Williams studied her face. There was something in her eyes, a hardness that he had seen before in certain types of veterans. Not the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too much, but the focused alertness of someone who had been trained to see threats everywhere and respond to them instantly. Specialized operations, he repeated. Like special forces? Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Something like that. Rico, who was still bleeding from his encounter with the soup cans, laughed bitterly. Special forces? Come on, deputy. She's just some single mom. There's no way she was in special forces. Williams ignored him and continued studying Sarah. He was beginning to piece together a picture that made him increasingly uncomfortable. The precision of her movements, the clinical way she had disabled 3 men without seriously injuring any of them, the complete lack of emotion in her voice when discussing violence. These were not typical characteristics of a fitness instructor or even a regular military veteran. Ms. Martinez, he said carefully, were you by any chance a Navy SEAL? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Jake, Rico, and Butch all turned to stare at Sarah with expressions ranging from disbelief to growing horror. The teenage clerk gasped audibly. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. Her cover was blown anyway. There was no way to explain what had just happened as the actions of a regular civilian. And these 3 men needed to understand exactly how much danger they had put themselves in. Yes, she said simply. The word fell into silence like a stone dropped into still water. Deputy Chin stopped what he was doing and stared. The 3 would-be attackers looked like they had just been told they had tried to mug a grizzly bear. Williams whistled low under his breath. He had served with some exceptional soldiers in his time, but he had never met an actual Navy SEAL, especially not a female one. The SEALs were among the most elite special forces units in the world, trained for the most dangerous and sensitive operations imaginable. How long? He asked. 8 years active duty, Sarah replied. 3 deployments to Afghanistan, 2 to Iraq, plus various other operations I can't discuss. Jake's face had gone completely white. Navy SEALs? He whispered. Oh God, what did we do? You attacked someone who has been trained to kill enemy combatants with her bare hands, Williams said bluntly. And you did it in front of her child. Mr. Morrison, you are incredibly lucky to be alive right now. Rico was shaking his head in denial. No way. Women can't be SEALs. That's not a thing. Williams turned to him with disgust. Mr. Valdez, the Navy opened SEAL training to women in 2016. Ms. Martinez would have been among the first women to complete the program, which means she was probably in the top 1% of the top 1% of military personnel. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but Williams caught a slight nod of confirmation. Butch finally spoke up, his voice hoarse. We didn't know. We thought she was just a regular person. You thought she was an easy target, Sarah corrected coldly. You saw a single mother with a child and decided she would be easy to victimize. You never bothered to consider that she might be capable of defending herself. But you could have killed us, Jake said, still cradling his injured wrist. Yes, Sarah agreed matter-of-factly. I could have. I chose not to. You should be grateful for that choice. The casual way she discussed lethal violence sent another chill through the 3 men. They were beginning to understand that they had not just made a mistake, they had nearly gotten themselves killed. Deputy Chen finally found his voice. Ma'am, with respect, what's someone with your background doing in a place like Cedar Ridge? Sarah looked toward Tommy, who was pretending to read a magazine but was obviously listening to every word. I retired from active duty 2 years ago. I wanted to give my son a normal, peaceful life away from violence and danger. Cedar Ridge seemed like the kind of place where we could blend in and be just another family. Until tonight, Williams observed. Until tonight, Sarah agreed. Williams was starting to put together a fuller picture of the situation. Sarah Martinez wasn't just a former SEAL, she was a former SEAL who had gone into hiding, probably under a new identity. People with her background didn't just retire and move to small towns unless they had very good reasons to disappear. Ms. Martinez, he said carefully, is there anything else I should know about your situation? Any reason why someone with your background would need to maintain a low profile? Sarah's eyes sharpened, and Williams saw her evaluate him quickly and thoroughly. She was deciding whether to trust him with information that was clearly sensitive. My service record is classified, she said finally. Let's just say that I made some enemies during my operational years, and maintaining my privacy is important for my son's safety as well as my own. Williams nodded. He had suspected something like that. SEALs didn't usually end up hiding in small Arizona towns unless they had compelling reasons to stay off the radar. Well, he said, looking at the 3 men who were now fully grasping the magnitude of their mistake. It looks like your cover is blown now. Sarah's jaw tightened. It appears so. Jake suddenly spoke up, his voice desperate. Look, we're sorry, okay? We didn't know who you were. We were just having some fun. We wouldn't have actually hurt you or the kid. Sarah turned to look at him with eyes like ice. You grabbed me when I tried to leave. You tried to grab my son. Your friend said you were going to take our conversation somewhere more private. Exactly what part of that wasn't intended to cause harm? Jake had no answer for that. Rico tried a different approach. Can't we just forget this whole thing happened? We'll stay away from you, you don't press charges, and everybody goes home? No, Sarah said simply. You threatened my child. That's not something I forget or forgive. Williams was beginning to understand that this situation was going to be more complicated than a simple assault case. Having a former Navy SEAL involved changed everything, especially one who had been living under an assumed identity. Ms. Martinez, he said, I'm going to need to contact some federal agencies about this incident. Your background and the circumstances of this attack may have implications beyond local law enforcement. Sarah nodded grimly. She had known this moment would come eventually. She had hoped for more time, a few more years of peace with Tommy before her past caught up with them. But these three idiots had destroyed that possibility in a single evening. I understand, she said. Do what you need to do. Tommy had apparently heard enough to realize that something major was happening. He left his magazine and came back to his mother's side, slipping his small hand into hers. Mom, he said quietly, are we in trouble? Sarah looked down at her son, this innocent child who had never asked to be part of her complicated world. No, sweetheart. We're not in trouble. But some things are going to change. Williams watched the interaction and felt a pang of sympathy. Whatever Sarah Martinez had done during her military service, she was clearly trying to be a good mother to her son. But her past wasn't going to stay buried, especially not now. The three men who had started this whole mess were finally beginning to understand the full scope of what they had done. They hadn't just attacked a woman and child, they had potentially compromised a classified military operation and exposed a highly trained operative who had been living in hiding. As Williams called for backup and began the process of arresting the three men, he wondered what kind of enemies a Navy SEAL might have made that would require her to disappear completely. And he wondered what those enemies would do when they learned that Sarah Martinez had been found. 3 days after the incident at the grocery store, Sarah Martinez sat in the living room of her small rental house, watching black SUVs pull up outside through her front window. She had been expecting this visit since Deputy Williams had made his phone calls, but that didn't make it any less nerve-wracking. Tommy was at school, which was probably for the best. The fewer people he saw coming and going from their house, the better. Sarah had spent the last 3 days preparing for this moment, knowing that her quiet life in Cedar Ridge was about to end permanently. The doorbell rang with the crisp authority of federal agents who were accustomed to having doors opened for them immediately. Sarah took a deep breath and went to answer it. 2 people stood on her doorstep. The first was a woman in her 40s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that came from decades in government service. The second was a younger man with the athletic build and alert eyes that Sarah recognized as military, probably Special Forces himself. Ms. Martinez, the woman said, holding up a badge. I'm Agent Patricia Hawkins, Department of Defense. This is Commander Jake Torres, Naval Special Warfare Command. May we come in? Sarah stepped aside to let them enter. Agent Hawkins looked around the modest living room with its comfortable furniture and Tommy's scattered toys, taking in the deliberately normal suburban environment that Sarah had created for her son. Nice place, Hawkins said. Very domestic. That was the point, Sarah replied. Would you like some coffee? That would be good, thank you. Sarah went to the kitchen and prepared coffee while the 2 visitors settled into her living room. She could hear them speaking in low voices, probably discussing how to handle the situation. When she returned with 3 mugs, they had arranged themselves in chairs facing the couch where she sat down. So, Agent Hawkins said after taking a sip of coffee, it seems your cover has been compromised. Completely blown, Sarah agreed. Local law enforcement knows who I am, and the incident made the local news. 3 men who were threatening me and my son now know exactly who they tried to attack. It won't be long before that information spreads. Commander Torres leaned forward. We've been monitoring communications since Deputy Williams contacted us. So far, there's no indication that any hostile entities have learned your location, but you're right that it's only a matter of time. Sarah nodded grimly. She had spent 2 years building a life where she and Tommy could be safe, and 3 drunk idiots had destroyed it in less than an hour. The 3 men who attacked you have been charged with assault, attempted kidnapping, and several other crimes, Agent Hawkins continued. They're currently in custody and have been advised by their lawyers not to speak to anyone about the incident. But we can't rely on their discretion permanently. What about the witnesses? The store clerk, the other customer? We've spoken with them, They'd been advised that discussing the incident could compromise national security, and they seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation. But again, we can't guarantee their silence indefinitely. Sarah set down her coffee mug and leaned back against the couch cushions. So what are my options? Torres and Hawkins exchanged a look before Torres spoke. There are several possibilities. We could relocate you again, set up new identities for both you and your son. It would mean starting over completely. New names, new location, new backstory. Tommy just made friends here, Sarah said quietly. He's finally settled in at school, feels secure. Moving again would be hard on him. The alternative, Agent Hawkins said carefully, is that we bring you back into active service. Sarah's head snapped up. What do you mean? The situation in several overseas theaters has deteriorated since your retirement, Torres explained. We've lost 2 operations in the past year that might have succeeded if we'd had someone with your particular skill set available. My particular skill set? Deep cover infiltration, linguistic abilities, cultural expertise in multiple regions, Hawkins listed. You were one of our most effective operatives for missions requiring long-term embedded presence in hostile territory. Sarah felt a familiar mix of pride and exhaustion. Those missions had been the most challenging and dangerous work of her career, requiring her to live for months at a time as someone completely different, gathering intelligence in places where discovery meant certain death. I have a son to think about now, she said. We understand that, Torres said. That's why we're prepared to make this offer very attractive. Full reactivation at your previous rank, with a substantial signing bonus and hazard pay. Plus, we would guarantee Tommy's safety and education. What does that mean exactly? Agent Hawkins opened a folder she had brought with her and pulled out several documents. We would place Tommy in a secure boarding school, one of the best in the country. Military families use it all the time for situations exactly like this. He would be completely safe, receive an excellent education, and you would have regular contact with him. Sarah felt her chest tighten. You want me to send my 8-year-old son away to boarding schools so I can go back to getting shot at in foreign countries? We want to offer you the opportunity to serve your country again while ensuring your son's safety and future, Torres corrected. The school we're talking about has produced senators, Supreme Court justices, and Fortune 500 CEOs. Tommy would have opportunities there that he could never have in a place like Cedar Ridge. Sarah looked around her living room again, thinking about the life she had built here. It wasn't glamorous or exciting, but it was peaceful. She could walk Tommy to school in the morning and help him with homework in the evening. They could have dinner together every night and watch movies on weekends. It was the kind of normal family life she had never imagined she could have. How long are we talking about? She asked. The current mission we have in mind would be approximately 18 months, Hawkins said. After that, you could reassess your situation. If you wanted to retire again, we would help you and Tommy establish new identities in a location of your choosing. And if I refuse? Then we relocate you immediately, Torres said. New identities, new location, the works. But we can't guarantee that your enemies won't eventually find you again, especially now that your cover has been blown once. Sarah understood the subtext. Her former enemies were persistent and well-resourced. If they had found her once, they could do it again. The only way to truly protect Tommy might be to eliminate those threats permanently. What's the mission? She asked. Agent Hawkins and Commander Torres exchanged another look before Hawkins opened a different folder and pulled out a classified briefing document. There's a terrorist network operating in North Africa that has been targeting American interests throughout the region, she began. They're led by a man named Hassan al-Rashid, who you may remember from your previous operations. Sarah's blood ran cold. She remembered Hassan al-Rashid very well. He had been a mid-level operative when she had encountered him during her last deployment, but apparently he had moved up in the world. He's been asking questions about the female American operative who disrupted his organization's activities 3 years ago, Torres continued. We believe he's actively searching for you. So this isn't just about a mission, Sarah said. This is about eliminating a threat to my family. That's a significant part of it, yes, Hawkins admitted. Al-Rashid has sworn to find and kill the woman who cost him his operation and his reputation. As long as he's alive, you and Tommy will never be truly safe. Sarah felt the weight of inevitability settling on her shoulders. She had always known that her past would catch up with her eventually. She had hoped for more time, more years of peace with her son, but that luxury had been taken from her by 3 drunk men who thought they could intimidate a single mother. I need to think about this, she said. Of course, Torres said. But we need an answer soon. Our intelligence suggests that Al-Rashid's people may have already started looking into the Cedar Ridge incident. If they make the connection. He didn't need to finish the sentence. If Hassan al-Rashid learned that Sarah Martinez was living in Cedar Ridge, Arizona, Tommy would be in immediate danger. Sarah walked to the window and looked out at the street where she had thought she and Tommy could build a normal life. A few houses down, she could see Mrs. Peterson watering her garden. Across the street, the Johnson kids were playing basketball in their driveway. Normal people living normal lives, blissfully unaware that a former Navy SEAL was sitting in their neighborhood trying to decide whether to send her son away so she could go kill terrorists. There's one more thing, Agent Hawkins said quietly. The 3 men who attacked you. Sarah turned back to face her. What about them? Jake Morrison, Rico Valdez, and Butch Harrison have all been offered plea deals in exchange for their complete silence about the incident. They've been made to understand that if any information about you or your background ever becomes public, they will face federal charges for compromising national security. And if they refuse the deals? They won't, Torres said with certainty. They've been shown exactly what could happen to them if they choose to talk. They're going to serve their time quietly and then disappear into witness protection for their own safety. Sarah almost laughed at the irony. The 3 men who had tried to victimize her were now so terrified of the consequences that they were willing to enter witness protection just to avoid any possibility of retribution from her former enemies. The sound of a school bus stopping outside interrupted her thoughts. Through the window, she saw Tommy getting off the bus, his backpack bouncing as he ran toward their front door. That's my son, she said to her visitors. I need you to leave before he comes in. I don't want him to see government agents in our living room. Agent Hawkins and Commander Torres stood up immediately. We understand, Hawkins said, handing Sarah a business card. Call me when you've made your decision. But don't take too long. They left through the back door just as Tommy came bursting through the front, full of excitement about his day at school. As Sarah listened to him chatter about his friends and his classes, she realized that no matter what choice she made, his childhood was about to change forever. Either she would send him to boarding school while she went back to war, or they would both disappear into new identities and spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders. The 3 men who had attacked them in that grocery store had stolen more than just their evening, they had stolen Tommy's chance at a normal childhood. That night, after Tommy had gone to bed, Sarah sat at her kitchen table and stared at Agent Hawkins' business card. Outside, Cedar Ridge was quiet and peaceful, the kind of small town where nothing dramatic ever happened. Except that 3 days ago, everything had changed, and there was no going back.